Hi, everyone. Let's go ahead and dive right into your very first case study for this class. So you are an HR manager for a small company, and the company now needs to set up a more sophisticated system to manage its employee personnel files because the company is growing, right? So you're located in the state of North Carolina. You must abide by federal and state regulations. So North Carolina is a great state to work in if you're an HR professional because they basically follow all the federal laws. I don't know if you know anything about laws, but federal is the minimum. Uh, and then if states want to enact more comprehensive laws, they certainly can. But North Carolina chooses to just follow the federal law. And in some cases, they do have their own little caveats here and there. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But for the most part, they just follow the simple federal laws when it comes to employment. All right. So your assignment was to do two things. First, locate the laws and regulations you must follow for managing personnel files. That's number one. And number two, provide a detailed plan on how you will accomplish this goal. Well, I'm really hoping you took a look at Module 1 resources because in there was a whole bunch of websites and all kind of like put together, you would have found record keeping requirements and how to organize files. So the first question talks about what laws are required. Well, here they are, right here, the EEOC record keeping requirement laws, and then the North Carolina privacy laws. These were the two laws that were needed for that question to be answered correctly. And not only did you need to identify those laws, but talk a little bit about why. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. And then the second question, how to organize your HR files, and then clearing up the confusion, paper to electronic files. So as long as you were able to talk a little bit about how you would organize those files. Now there's no right or wrong way to organize your files as long as it's done with security in mind, and that's part of those privacy laws and things. As long as they're secure files, then you should do just fine on that second part of the question. Well, let's go ahead and look at the EEO requirements. I made myself a little document here before I made the video just to kind of have talking points. So I don't know if you can see my screen right now, but here are my talking points. So the EEO requires employers to do a couple different things. Now, obviously, we have EEO laws. It's equal employment opportunity. We can't discriminate. And so those are the laws. But in addition to having laws that prohibit discrimination, they also have record keeping requirements as well. So that way, if someone does file a claim and they walk into the EEOC office, the EEOC can then investigate. And so that's a requirement. I do want to talk a little bit about the EEO laws. So when you hear EEO, it's kind of think about it as an umbrella statement for discrimination, right? And so there are a couple of different ways that discrimination can take place. And so there are a couple different laws that fall under that umbrella. Make sense? All right. And so for the most part, employers with 15 or more employees are required to adhere to the following EEO laws. So this is kind of the blanket statement, and I'm going to go through really quickly and talk about the laws that fall under that umbrella. So the first one is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. We should know that one by now, I would hope. So in addition to the Title VII of Civil Rights Act, you also have the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. And so while the Pregnancy Discrimination Act is technically its own act, it does fall under Title VII because pregnancy discrimination is also considered sex discrimination, and sex discrimination falls under Title VII, right? We also have the Equal Pay Act. We have the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, the Americans with Disability Act, and the Genetics Information Non-Discrimination Act. So those, let's see, I'm going to count them, 6 laws fall under EEO. Now, I found all of this information very easily out on the EEO website. I literally just Googled, what are the EEO laws? I clicked on it, it pulled up, and then on the EEOC website, it listed these laws. Very simple. Now, there are some additional laws that have to do with government employers. That's a little bit different. So when you go to that website, you might see a couple different things that aren't on this list. And that's okay because they have a couple different things that they have to do for government type employers, but for regular civilian employers, these are the laws that apply to them. All right, so now that we have an understanding of what those laws are, let's go ahead and see what the EEOC states about how to keep those personnel or employment records. Right, so the EEOC requires that employers keep all personnel and all employment records for at least 1 year. In addition to that, if an employee is involuntarily terminated, they also have to keep those personnel files for 1 year after the termination date. Pretty simple, right? All right. In addition, anything that relates to employee benefits, pension, 401k, insurance plans, you name it, dental, vision, whatever, all must be kept as well for a full period. So if you're talking about insurance plans, you have to keep all of that information for one full period, during that full period, and 1 year after the termination of that plan. So again, we're just basically saying you have to keep the records for at least 1 year. Now, the ADEA, the Age Discrimination Act, they say we like your 1 year, but we're going to go ahead and say 3 years. They're special. I don't know why it's special, because when you look at the all the other different laws, it's 15 or more employees for Title VII, for equal pay, for Americans with Disability, and then the Genetics Act. But for whatever reason, when they were creating the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, they said it's 20 employees. And then not only is it 20 employees, but they need to keep records for 3 years when it comes to payroll, right? So you can get rid of the other stuff, but you have to hold on to the payroll records for 3 years. It could be a little bit confusing knowing all these different timelines. I'll tell you my hints in just a second. And then last, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, record keeping requirements applicable to the Equal Pay Act, EPA, employers must keep payroll records for 3 years. And then also talks a little bit about merit systems, job evaluations, all of that. As an HR professional, it can be a little confusing trying to remember, okay, I can keep the benefits for a year, that information for a year, but the payroll stuff I have to keep for 3 years, but then this other information I only have to keep for a year, and it can be a little bit confusing. And so what we always did when I worked as an HR consultant was I always suggested you find the largest timeline, and depending on what that state was, sometimes it was 5 years, 3 years, 7 years, and it might not even have to deal with personnel files exactly. I think ICD-9s are only required for 7 years. Don't quote me on that. I have to go look that up. It's been a while since I've consulted on this stuff. But what you do is you find the longest length that's required, and let's say it's 7 years. So you take that 7 years, and then you just keep everything for 7 years. That way you're not making any mistakes. It's administratively more, it's easier to say, okay, I'm just going to keep everything for 7 years than it is to say, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of the benefits information after a year. I'm going to get rid of the payroll information after 3 years. I'm going to get rid of the ICD-9 after so many years. It can get very confusing. And I don't think we have the cognitive space, at least I don't, to keep track of all those different years. And so it's much easier just to default to the longest amount of time. I hope you were able to figure out what I was just saying there. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the employee privacy law. So that's the EEOC laws. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the employee privacy laws. And so this talks about what's required as far as who has access to those personnel files, and that they are private. So there was no federal law that talked about privacy. So when you go out and you look for a federal law regarding privacy information, there was nothing there. So the Fed left it up to the states to then enact their own laws as it relates to personnel files. So not everybody's going to have access to a personnel file, right? Only certain people have access, and then making sure that information is kept private. And so that information was found right here in the employee privacy laws. All right, so that was the first section. Again, I hope you were able to talk about that at length. If you missed out, if you didn't speak about the North Carolina privacy laws or you didn't talk about EEOC, then you're only going to get partial credit for that first question. Now, the detailed plan, that second question, there is no right or wrong answer, but just a detailed one. So as long as you're able to provide a logical, strategic approach to keeping these different files, you'll do just fine on that second part. Most students, if they do miss anything on the assignment, they miss it in the first section, but I will tell you most students get it right, get the second section right, because it's just a matter of opinion and a well-supported opinion at that. If you go up to your resources one last time, you can see that here we have, we talked a little bit about record keeping versus paper record keeping versus electronic, and then how to organize the file. So hopefully that helped you with that second question. All right, if you have any questions as to why you missed some information, take a look at the rubric, and then that should give you a clear indication as to what areas you missed, if anything. All right, take care.